if you want to introduce yourself in the chat, like, name, pronouns, whereabout you're maybe joining us in from. And also, if it's your first ever debt collective call or first time on a Jubilee School call, would love to hear and know that from folks.
Wow. Seeing lots of folks joining for the first time, which is really exciting, and some good news from some folks too, getting it with some relief, it looks like, with bankruptcy. Congrats. Well, maybe we can jump in with some introductions, Nick, as people kind of trickle in, and then, yeah, get the ball rolling a little bit.
Totally. Well, I will introduce myself and then maybe I'll popcorn it back to you, Kristen, of hi, folks. I know a number of folks might know me, but some others might not. My name is Nick Marcil, he, him. I'm an organizer with the Debt Collective based in Pennsylvania. And also on here of some other Debt Collective folks before I toss it to Kristen just to say is Eleni Shermer. Some folks might know her. And then also Jason Wozniak. And Jason is the one who kind of oversees a lot of the Jubilee School stuff. In particular, to just say Jubilee School is our kind of like political education within the Debt Collective, right? We know that education should not be something that is burdened by debt, which is why in part we have this Jubilee School series. We have a whole host of events, continuing through kind of like the fall into the winter. And I'll be sure to kind of like shout them out a little bit at the end. But it's really awesome to have folks here and really incredible to have Kirstin here, who is an educator, is a debt collective member, is a writer, and really has a lot of experience here to share with tonight. And, trying to work with folks in here and further writing out, workshopping their stories, and whether that's a debt story that is specific to student debt, as I know that might be a little bit more of the focus tonight, or even if it's, on some other debt types, it's really great to have folks here. But I'm going to popcorn it back to yourself, Kristen.
Hi, it's so great to see you all. So yeah, Kirstin Collier, and like Nick said, I am a writer and an educator and a member of the Debt Collective, and also a person with a lot of debt. And my hope tonight is that we can think through some kind of key questions that can help to kind of frame and guide the drafting of your debt story. And then if you want to, you can come back to session number 2 and we can begin to workshop these. And the workshop was really born out of my own struggles trying to talk about my debt. And I hope you leave feeling confident and energized to tell some of your story. So we can flip the slides over to the agenda. So we're going to have a welcome question or an opening question in a minute, and we'll get into some groups and talk to each other a little bit. And then from there, I kind of have 4 big questions that are going to guide tonight. And then with each of the big questions, I have 2 essays that we're going to send out as well that you can look at later to use as kind of mentor text to begin thinking about how you might answer these questions. And then we'll have a little time to brainstorm after we work through each of these questions. And so you can use that time to kind of jot down some thinking you have on a notepad or type something on the computer. Or if you don't feel ready to record anything yet, you can just be kind of internally thinking about them. And then if we have time, we'll share a little bit throughout this experience as well. So you can flip the slides to our questions for tonight, our opening questions. So I'm going to have us get into breakout groups in a second, in groups of 4 or 5, whatever you think, Nick. And then I'm going to have us answer one of 2 of these questions. What's been a piece of writing? So it could be an essay or an op-ed or article or a book that's moved you recently, and what about it made it so effective? Or what do you hope to get out of tonight's session, and what are your writing aspirations? And then if your group finishes early, maybe you can go back through and answer whatever question you didn't answer the first time around. And then we'll come back together in about 5 minutes.
Feel free to try to get into that breakout if you're able to. If not, that is a-okay. We can also stay here and I can try to. Okay, awesome. And then tried to let folks know of having this conversation on these 2 questions. But go ahead, Kirstin, keep us.
Yeah, thank you so much. And I had great conversation with my group, and they brought up a great question that I realized I hadn't addressed, which is sort of who is the intended audience for the pieces that could come out of tonight. And I guess what I would say to that is that you can, that's built in a little bit to one of the questions I have, but maybe isn't totally clear. You're going to kind of decide who you want to write this for, whether you want it to be for public consumption, in which case you'll probably have 2 kind of big buckets, or you just want to write it for yourself. The way that I have mostly thought about framing it is that you're writing it for someone else. And so most of the questions are directed to how to kind of translate and unpack your story for someone who isn't you. But I think you could get a lot out of it still, even if you don't know for sure if you want to share this essay with someone else yet. So thank you for those questions from the folks in my group. You can flip the slides, Nick. So I thought it might be interesting to just kind of take the temperature of the room to kind of see where we're at with writing our debt story. And so I'm going to have you kind of put in the chat either numbers 1, 2, or 3, 4, kind of based on where you are. So 1 is you haven't thought about your story in written form because you've just been hanging on and surviving, which has been me for a lot of my life. 2, you've thought about it, but you haven't written anything yet. 3, you've written portions of it, and 4, a full draft. So let's just kind of see where we're at so far tonight. Cool, I am seeing all the numbers. This is great. My hope is by the end of tonight, you will certainly all have number 2 done. And you'll have thought through some big questions. Yes, Nick, any number is awesome. And then I also think many of us will at least get to number 3, where we're going to have an opportunity to write a little bit of the draft, or at least do some brainstorming that might be turned into an essay at some point. And then depending on kind of what you want to do next, then you'll have an opportunity to complete the draft and come back for another session. So wherever you are in the process, hopefully we can move you along a little bit tonight. Okay, you can flip the slides. So the 4 key questions we'll be walking through tonight is, how much of my story will I tell in this essay? How should I start the essay off? Which details do I include? And then what's the argument? And so we're going to walk through all 4 of these. And if you have a second, whenever you have a second, Nick, if you want to put in the chat the link to the Google folder, I have created a Google folder where I'm compiling personal essays about debt. And so in specifically student debt, although I'll add other essays about other debt types as well. And 2 of these essays we're going to talk about tonight is kind of 2 options of directions to go in, but will be a bunch of other essays that you can read through on your own. I know when I'm feeling really stuck, it's sometimes helpful for me to read another writer's work to kind of dislodge whatever's blocking me. And so you'll have that option later, but I'll be talking through a couple of them tonight as well. And I see that Nick just dropped the link in there. And so I'll keep adding. And if you have essays that you enjoy that you want me to add to the folder, I can as well. Okay, so we will move to the next slide. Sorry, Nick, I'm really making you do a lot of different things here. So the first big question is just how much of my story will I tell? And I think this is an important question to identify because probably if your experiences with debt are anything like mine, they might be big and long and complex and involve of all kinds of different kind of like plot twists and experiences, and your debt might be connected to different types of debt and different family members. And you have to figure out kind of which chunk you want to carve out to be able to tell that story to someone else. So we can flip the slides. Okay, so here are some related questions that I think will kind of help you narrow down how much of your story you want to tell. The first thing is if you think you'd like to write something short or something long. If you want to write something short for your personal essay, I think an op-ed is a really good direction to go in. And that's an essay that's about 800 words. You'll make kind of a clear argument as part of that essay. Often these are a little easier to place if it's really important to you to get yours published. If you think you want to write something longer, then you'll write something that I'll call a long form essay. And that could be anywhere from 1,000 to 6,000 words. And actually it could be even upwards of 12,000 words, but I think it's a little harder to get super long things placed. Perhaps you don't really know. If you feel like there's a whole bunch of stuff you want to say, maybe you want to go in the longer form direction. If you feel like you have a little bit of a shorter story you want to tell that's maybe a little bit more argument focused, then you might want to go in the op-ed direction. So that's the first question to answer. The second thing is there a key moment that you want to use to anchor the essay? There might be one particular kind of striking memory attached to the debt that you know you want to include, and you might want to kind of structure the essay around that memory. So that's something you want to think about. Third point, what additional plot points might be useful in understanding your larger story? And I put those in quotes because I know your story is your real life and it's not just a part of kind of a cinematic adventure. But I think identifying if there's some other key moments that feel clearly attached to the story you want to tell will be helpful. And then finally, is there anything that feels essential to you but might feel too technical to include for readers? Are there parts of your story you know you can cut? I know for me, at least, I have a whole bunch of different private debt and there's all kinds of different interest rates attached. And at different points in time, I figured out there were different kinds of private loans I took out that had these sort of different kind of like borrowing limits and that were handled a different way by my school. And at one point in something I wrote, I wanted to tell that whole story and an editor had to say, listen, this is interesting to you, but it's really not relevant to your larger story. And so there might be some elements of that in your story as well. And so that's another question you might have to answer. So flip the slides. So there's two essays that we're going to look at as our kind of mentor text tonight. The first is called Been Down So Long It Looks Like Debt to Me by M.H. Miller, and it was in the Baffler. And this is a long form essay. It's many thousands of words. I think it's probably like 10,000 words. I didn't run it through a word count, but it's super long. It's awesome. It doesn't center on one key moment, but tells the chronological story of the writer's life and his family's life, and it covers kind of everything. And so the big kind of plot points of this essay are, it talks about the writer's parents' job losses and the loss of their home, their move to New York, their long time unemployment, Miller's graduation with an enormous student debt burden, his mother's cancer, his family's balancing act, paying debts, his family's appeal to specific politicians to try to get out of this debt burden, his marriage, and then his eventual refinancing with SoFi. And so he covers the entire kind of sweep of his experience with indebtedness. And his essay is also kind of about the ways in which his debt is connected to and entangled with all these other things happening in the country and also his family's debt burden. So he went the long form route. We can flip the page.
Just quick before we do,
Oh,
I
yeah.
just wanted to add to, I saw Casey or Cassandra had asked of, can you give an example of what a key moment, that like anchors an essay might be? And I'm curious both to hear from yourself, Kirstin, but then also if folks in the chat want to share maybe an idea of like in your head of what maybe you think like a key moment kind of in your own life story might be, to Casey's question. But yeah, Kirstin, do you have?
Yeah, that's great. Wow, there's so many depending on the length, but one moment that I know I thought about and included in my writing before was I had this memory of a debt collector, harassing me as a young person living in New York City. And I was walking down this grocery store aisle looking at all these beautiful cans of tomato sauce I couldn't afford. And there was a contrast between these beautiful sort of like decadent things in front of me that were meant to nourish me. And then this collector telling me that I had to pay them money that I didn't have. And so I had all this sort of like suffering in my ear and that felt really terrifying. And then this food in front of me. And so I have started off a piece of writing with that memory before, and then kind of moved back in time to talk a little bit more about how I acquired the debt, and then moved forward in time to kind of catch readers up with where I was today. And so that's just one memory from my life. And then in the next example essay, this writer did use one key memory, and so we can look at the next essay as well.
If they have been used to being married, it's hard.
So the second essay example, which is also in the folder, is called The Student Loan Serenity Prayer by Michael Arsenault in the New York Times. And then this is also a personal essay, but this is an op-ed. So this is several hundred words in length. And so if you think you want to go this direction, this could be a good model for you to read through and think about later, and to kind of follow along with the workshop. So this begins with a low moment in the writer's life. He has a phone call with his cousin in which he expresses how bad he's doing, and then he shuts off his phone, and his cousin freaks out and is worried that he's going to hurt himself. And so the essay begins in this sort of crushing, lonely, fearful moment, and then moves into his thinking about his debt and his journey he's gone on. So the essay includes this phone call. It includes the college recruitment. He kind of moves back in time to remember when recruitment people came from Howard University to tell him to apply to their school. He thinks about his decision to take on private debt, his commencement. I think Oprah speaks at his commencement, and he remembers that. And then at the end of the essay, he has a new understanding of how few choices he ultimately had, and he moves away from blaming himself to blaming the system. And so what's left out of this essay is a lot. We don't hear anything about his struggles with payments. We don't get the particulars of his loan burdens, how much he borrows, or what the interest rates are, or what his monthly payments look like. We don't have conversations with lenders or efforts to refinance. And so this essay has chosen to go a sort of more narrow path to make a more narrow argument and have kind of a shorter story in shorter form. And we can switch the slides. Okay, so your turn. I want us to take about 5 minutes just kind of on our own now, and you can leave your camera screen on or turn it off or do whatever you think will help kind of generate your thinking. And so I want you to move through these questions, and you might have already written something and you already know these answers, which is cool, but some of us haven't. So do you think you'd like to write something shorter or longer? Do you think there's a key moment you might want to anchor the essay? What additional plot points do you think would be useful in helping a reader to kind of understand your larger story? And then finally, is there anything that you think you'd like to leave out of the essay? So let's take 5 minutes, jot down some moments there. You also have available the folder if you want to begin skimming through some of the essays during this time. Okay, we will see you in a few minutes. For folks just entering, we are brainstorming answers to the 4 questions posted on the slides right now. And I also want to give a little shout out to the chat. If you're feeling stuck, there's some really powerful and devastating examples in here of some things people are thinking about sharing. So take about 30 seconds and finish up kind of whatever question you're working on right now. Okay, we're going to come back together now. And just for the sake, I wish we could all hear from each other. And if we were in a physical classroom space, we'd have a chance probably to do that. But for the sake of time, I'm just going to ask if 2 or 3 volunteers would share something that emerged from that brief brainstorming session. So a key moment or what they think that they want to focus on or what form they want their essay to take. Are there 2 or 3 people who would want to share what came up during that brainstorming time? And if not, that's okay too. Okay. Well, there's really awesome and powerful ideas in the chat that you can refer to if you're feeling stuck. Okay, we
I
will
could
switch.
jump.
Oh, great.
I could, or Kim, do you want to go? Or I'm open and flexible.
Go for it,
You can
Karen.
go. You can go.
Oh, okay. I was thinking about a essay I was had tried to actually uh publish in our local papers. I just got a couple of no's. They said something, the feedback was like, well, this is already being reported in a national issue, older student debt. So it kind of crushed me and I just went, I'm not ready to go back out again. And that was, I've, and I'm busy, I'm working, right? Uh, so I'm going back to that article, and maybe because I have kids that kind of want to go to college too. I realized in my essay, there was this point in my essay where I'm lecturing at a university. I'm teaching, I know it's 100+ students, and it was before lecture, and I'm futzing with the cord and the microphone. And there was a chat in front of me of students talking about their student loan debt. And I didn't realize my mic was on, I go, oh, I just kind of jumped in and I said, oh, I'm still paying off my debt. And it echoed in the whole room, and everybody stopped, just looked at me. It was very quiet. And I went, oh shit. They don't think I have a student loan debt. Like, I'm supposed to be this professional, or I don't know, I'm supposed to have my life together. I know, definitely you have a student loan debt. I felt so bizarre and dissociated a little bit for a few moments, like, wow, I'm so vulnerable right now. Well, let's get to the material. But I think I took it as a moment to go, to the students. I go, you want to think about what you're doing here, because you could have a debt here. But as we did this exercise, I was thinking, I realized in this moment that I saw myself when I was a student in college, at a community college, a first generation college student, and I looked at my teachers, and to me, they just seemed like the epitome of success. They own their own cars, their own houses. They had vacation houses even, or they had private practices. They just kind of, and these were community college teachers. These were, and I remember just like, wow, if I could work hard, I love this subject, I could be like that, and I go, wow, I probably just rocked their world a little bit, that no, you could graduate and have a ton of debt and still be paying them off. So I think in this flash, I saw myself. I was really vulnerable. And then I saw myself and how, as part of a system that didn't work for me. And it was quickly after that I had to kind of leave teaching, that I go, I can't do this um anymore. So that was your kind of the moment I'm thinking about trying to explore.
Thank you so much, Karen. What a powerful moment. And there's so many kind of layers and themes that are intertwined with that moment of sort of like exposure and confession. I really appreciate that. So let's hear from Kimberly. And then I had two other people that I know had volunteered too. I have to go up and find where they are, but we'll hear from Kimberly next. And then I think it was Sarah and Lorraine, and then we'll move on to the next question.
Hello. So I had previously written an op-ed that I was working on and shopping around about the big beautiful bill and all of the changes to student loan debt that were going to be put into that. And I think we're seeing already a lot of negative ramifications from like the shuttering of the DOE as it is with the shutdown, etc. I didn't have any luck getting the op-ed I had previously written published, but I have recently been reading additional stories about how this administration is considering selling part of or the entire student loan debt portfolio to the private market. And it's insane. So I had student loan debt. Most of my debt was private. That wasn't by choice. That was because I didn't qualify for X amount of funding from the federal government. That's obviously, they just keep making things more complicated. But I had private student loan debt, and my interest rate was variable, and it just absolutely destroyed my mental health. I was working multiple jobs. There would be 3-4 weeks at a time where I would work back-to-back days without any days off at multiple jobs. And it got to the point where I had to default on my private loans. Otherwise, I couldn't live like that anymore. So I defaulted. It destroyed my credit. They were trying to sue me, and then COVID ironically saved my life in that regard, because the lawsuit fell through, and then by the time that they were going to try to get back around to it, the statute of limitations had expired. So I borrowed 80,000, I paid back over 100,000, and my principal went up. So by the time I defaulted, I had owed 170,000. So I still have $36,000 left. It's the federal loans that I have left. So just the idea of being put back on this private loan rat race treadmill because this administration might choose to sell the debt to the private market. I think that I would consider like sharing my personal experience with my default and my experiences living with the private loan debt, which a lot of people aren't very aware of, in terms of trying to express to people like just how potentially horrific and catastrophic taking the federal protections away from people who have the student loans and making them private. So that's something I was considering playing around with.
Yeah, thank you so much. And that's so timely with these discussions about this potential sale. I would love to read that. Sarah?
Yeah, I was just going to work on writing. I actually wrote my dead story of, my personal story a while back, and thanks to some really, really helpful editing people like Eleni, it did get published at MSNBC, and it came out amazing. And that's why groups like this are so important, because editing is huge. And it got the story down to just something clear and concise, and was incredibly helpful. But I wanted to work on now is writing my daughter's death story. And she went to a trade school. She went to a trade school for hairdressing, and I wanted to do a story. I love that you had those questions about what we want to accomplish. So I want to write an op-ed length story about her trade school debt. The key moment would have been when she graduated. She actually went to 2 trade schools. She went for early childhood education when she was in high school. It was like a hybrid high school trade school thing. And then she went for hairdressing later, which is where she got the debt. But her graduation in high school from the trade school portion, the gender disparity of the kids that were graduating from this trade school program, the boys were graduating in HVAC, auto mechanics, plumbing, construction, and they would do a little thing like, "Oh, this kid's going to join, this company. He's going to be making this amazing salary." And for the girls, it was hairdressing and early childhood education, and probably the most lucrative one was an LPN certificate. But the female students, and I think this is true for a lot of working class families, the female students, when you have those kind of working class jobs, they just don't make as much. And it was pretty incredible to me that there wasn't any, I mean, maybe 1 or 2 brave souls, but other than that, really no crossover in gender between these kids graduating from this trade school program. And those trade schools aren't free. This one, the one she went to in high school actually was, but they are not free. And especially for anyone who's out of high school. And it really puts women at a disadvantage not to be able to go into those, everyone's trade schools, it's so awesome. But not a lot of women go into plumbing for whatever reason. They just don't. And that was just what I wanted to explore in this.
Oh, I appreciate that so much. That sounds really interesting, and such a reminder about the gendered nature of the student debt burden. And then last volunteer, Lorraine. Okay. I don't hear from Lorraine. Lorraine, if you hear this and you want to jump back in at any time, please do. But we will move on to the next question.
Hello, can you hear me now?
Yes, there you are.
Yeah, sorry. I'm doing this on my phone. It's a little difficult. Well, first of all, I just really want to thank all of you for all of the work that you're doing. My student loan debt story is really harrowing. I am raised by a single mother, no alimony or support from my father, who was very ill. I'm like a first generation student. And I started graduate school at University of Chicago in the doctoral program. And my dissertation topic was immigration policies and party politics. And basically, I predicted the moment that we're living in right now. And 3 famous professors kept saying that I didn't have a topic. That was Gary Orfield, and then Michael Dawson, and then Saskia Sassen. So I kept persisting and persisting because I felt that I was right in my topic. And now I have student loan debt that I have zero capacity to pay whatsoever. And I want to thank you for this idea of writing an op-ed, because I don't even mind naming those professors now because they know what they did. And you know, they're all famous, right? And I don't have my PhD. I'm ABD, but with no capacity to make money from all of the years that I spent. So I became a policy advocate and, you know, spokesperson for the Fight for 15 campaign. But I have zero capacity after raising 2 kids by myself to pay back any of these student loans.
I'm so sorry you're going through that, and that sounds like a really powerful op-ed as well. Thank you for sharing that. We are going to go to question number 2 then. So how should I start my essay? And I think this is a hard question for me as a writer, and I think really important because kind of the moment or note you start on kind of sets often the pace and the energy and kind of the tenor of the essay going forward. So let's look at some of those other questions we might ask to help answer this main one. So if you're grounding your essay in a key moment or memory, you should start there. And so I encourage you to think about what kinds of cinematic details will help bring this moment to life. Is there a bit of dialogue that is a part of this memory? Do you remember the actual thoughts you were having at the time? Is there any visual information that would be useful? How can you make it feel like a kind of a lived, fully formed moment for the readers? If you're writing a longer essay that includes a lot of your story, you also don't have to begin at the kind of true beginning when you acquired the loans. And often I would encourage you not to do that. What would be the impact of beginning at a later point and then summarizing some of the earlier information? I think often when we start at the sort of moment when we acquire the loans and then move forward in time, we tend to kind of include everything, and the essay kind of moves more slowly and sometimes has details we don't necessarily need. Whereas if we start at a later moment in time and flash back, we're sort of forced to move a little bit more quickly through that material. Is there a particular moment that might be most compelling for your reader to encounter first? Okay, let's switch the slides. So let's read this. Is there any volunteer who would like to read the opening paragraph to this essay in the Baffler for us?
Sure.
Thank you.
On Halloween in 2008, about 6 weeks after Lehman Brothers collapsed, my mother called me from Michigan to tell me that my father had lost his job in the sales department of Visteon, an auto parts supplier for Ford. 2 months later, my mother lost her own job working for the city of Troy, a suburb about a half an hour from Detroit. From there, our lives seemed to accelerate, the terrible events compounding fast enough to elude immediate understanding. By June, my parents, unable to find any work in the state where they spent their entire lives, moved to New York, where my sister and I were both in school. A month later, the mortgage on my childhood home went into default for lack of payment.
Yeah, what a powerhouse of a beginning to an essay. And I think this is doing lots of different things. One, it's situating the writer's debt in this context of familial debt, and then in this larger kind of national moment when we have the subprime mortgage crisis. And so we get his own story as a part of a larger landscape. And then I think the other thing that's really cool here is this is all, I guess it's 2 sentences, but it's 2 kind of like long sentences. And the paragraph itself seems to kind of accelerate alongside the author's story. And so much is packed into this opening. So that is something you might try, is kind of rapidly listing a bunch of stuff that has happened as a way to kind of catch the reader up. So that's one example introduction. You can flip the slides. And then here's a second one. Do we have a volunteer who'd be willing to read this one? Okay, I can read it. Several years ago, while driving around Los Angeles in a state of equal parts fury and despair, I called my cousin to tell her how sick of it all I was, that I was tired and couldn't take it anymore. Then I turned off my phone. I needed silence. When I turned it on again a few hours later, I was greeted with frantic voicemail messages. Back then, most people still checked those, including a good number from my mother. She was terrified of what I might have done. And so in the second essay, that is the op-ed one, the shorter one, we begin in this moment of suffering on this phone call, and then the moment when he turns it off and then gets these messages later. And so we also get this sort of the implication here that his family was so worried about him, they thought he might have hurt himself, which isn't kind of like directly stated, but implied. So we have kind of two options, this kind of accelerated summary, and then this in this moment recollection of a painful memory. So you can flip the slide. So I want you to think back about kind of your first rounds of brainstorming you did, all the stuff that you think you want to cover and the form you think you want your essay to take. And then I want you to either jot down some answers to these questions, or if you're feeling inspired and have something in mind, I want you to take a couple minutes and actually try to write your first paragraph. So either answer these questions or attempt to write your first paragraph, and then we'll come back together in 5 more minutes. So take a moment and kind of wrap up whatever thing that you're working on, and we're going to come back together in, a minute or less. Okay, so we're gonna move on to the next question, and I'm hoping there'll be some time for volunteers to share a little bit later in the session, but I want to make sure we get to everything. So question number 3 is, which details do I include? What sorts of details help to translate the feeling of living with debt? And I ask this question because for me as a writer, it feels really challenging to tell someone else what it feels like to live with debt, especially someone who hasn't had debt before or had the kind of debt that feels unpayable or unlivable. And it feels like a kind of presence in my life, but also sort of absence, and helping to capture that for someone else, I think can feel really difficult. So here are some other questions to help support this one. Can you use a metaphor to help? This debt felt like, when I got collection notices, it felt as if. I think sometimes if you are feeling like the words you're coming up with are flat or don't get at the sort of core of what you want, trying for something a little bit more poetic, such as using a metaphor, can be really helpful. And if you haven't tried, to write metaphorically in a while, it's also kind of fun. Are there particular thoughts you've had throughout the process that could illuminate your experience for someone else? Is there a way to make your experiences visual or sensory? Perhaps zooming in on a poignant memory. Sometimes you're able to use the setting to capture something happening kind of internally in you in a way that can be hard to do otherwise. Are there striking calculations you were forced to make that you could include? Many of us are having to decide between paying for one thing or paying for something else. Making clear that set of calculations for someone else can help capture what you were going through. So let's look at some of our examples. So in essay number 1, I have 2 different examples here of moments in which I think that the reader or the writer is translating his feeling, his experiences with debt for someone else pretty well. Is there anyone who'd be willing to read just the second example for me?
Sure. I could
Thank
read
you.
it all even.
We'll just look at the second one for the sake of time.
Okay, so I just go into the second one. All right. Once I could no longer delay and the payments began, a question echoed through my head from the moment the day began and often jolted me awake at night. I would look at the number on my paycheck and obsessively subtract my rent, the cost of a carton of eggs and a can of beans, and the price of a loan payment. The question was, what will you do when the money from the paycheck is gone?
Thank you so much. I think this is a great moment of translating his experience because it offers that sort of constant calculation that I think so many of us are having to do when we struggle with debt, and makes it super material, and that he's having to think of like eggs or beans. And then we also get this question that is operating like a kind of haunting that is hanging over him at all points in time. So let's look at the next example. So in essay number 2, which is the shorter essay, the op-ed, I'm going to ask if someone could read the second passage for that one as well. Oh, thank you, Rashid.
You're welcome. And for so long, I took to heart the poisonous folklore about student debt martyrs who selflessly scrape by to pay off their loans. Those, I only ate Spam and paid off my $160,000 debt in 96 hours stories. I blamed myself, thinking that if I had just worked harder and sacrificed more, I wouldn't be in this situation.
You all are such good readers. This is so lovely to hear you all read. I think this one's really cool because this is actually something that I should have put in the bullet points, but I didn't. I think sometimes including things that other people have told you can be kind of interesting to unpack what you were facing. And so here we get the writer internalizing these messages, at least for a while, that other people have given him and blaming himself for them. Thank you. So we can flip the slides. So I want us to take some minutes and think about specific details from our student debt stories that we think we could translate for someone else reading. And so I have these questions here and I'll copy and paste them in the chat. And then we'll come back in 5 minutes and I'll ask for a couple of volunteers to share a little bit of writing that they came up with. We're going to come back together in about 30 seconds. Okay, I'd love to hear from a handful of people if they're willing to read something that came out of the brainstorming experience. I'll look in the chat and look around to see if I can find any hands.
Can I say something?
Yeah, thanks,
Um,
Jeanette.
so I was thinking about the first part that felt like I was like it was making me feel like a failure. Because I seen my mother struggle and I wanted to do better and make her proud of me. And um, when I went into school, they made promises, and that's why I joined the school so that I can make more money and you know just do better for myself overall. And they lied and didn't end up helping me find a job in the career that I got an associate's degree in. And then I couldn't find a job on my own. They wanted experience, and that's something that I didn't have in that field. And then next thing you know, my paychecks start getting garnished. I start getting scared because I didn't know, because I was risk of losing my car, getting my credit messed up. So, and then to the point that I had to file for bankruptcy, even though my loans weren't forgiven because I didn't know that was an option. Um, but at least to forgive other stuff that I was taking out to survive. So I was taking like payday loans, anything just to help me get by. And then, so eventually I did do that, but then I had to go back to my mom to live with her because I couldn't maintain myself anymore, couldn't support myself. And also the fact that I had to go back to school. So, um, and I still have that loan. And it's just, I'm paying more of interest than I am at the principal. So I feel like I'm getting nowhere with that loan. It's just sitting there. And yeah, and that's where I am now. Still going to school and still trying to get better and hopefully someday do something about that loan, or I don't know. I still don't know what to do about it to this day. So
I really appreciate you sharing that. And I think lots of us can identify with that feeling of a failure, which is such a devastating experience after trying our best to, have access to meaningful jobs and a good education. Next up, I think Miranda had their hand up next.
Hi, yeah, this is Miranda. I don't have nice polished writing to share. I have a little bit of like a stream of consciousness outline, basically, if that's okay. But I've been because I came into this workshop without really any kind of a plan and not really sure that I had a debt story that's relevant. And then I realized, oh, I do. It's not about student loan debt, it's about rent debt. And I have a combo of personal experience, and I do a lot of housing advocacy in New York City. And so trying to figure out how to sort of meld those into a story. So anyway, the prompt that clicked this for me was the thing about striking calculations. So I'm just going to read what I wrote, which is, again, it's not part of an essay. It's more a description of an essay. But I wrote, in the summer of 2020, when I was homeless and owed $11,000 in rent debt, I moved everything I owned across the country via the USPS. I hauled the boxes by hand to the post office in an ill-fitting mask in the heat. Somehow I kept the entire cost of the move under $1,000. I think this is where the piece starts, with better, clearer imagery that I haven't written yet. Lol. And then the intro section concludes with the fact that at the time, I genuinely didn't realize that I was homeless. And then the next section transitions into a more traditional journalism to talk about how most poor young people in New York City don't have formal leases and are living doubled up, meaning like they're sharing rooms, or each person rents one room in an apartment. which meant that they didn't qualify for the pandemic relief programs, which is also what happened to me. And then eventually it would go into how things are now in 2025, as a lot of these programs are lapsing, but people are still dealing with the same issues, which is that they don't qualify for homeless assistance because their situations don't fit in specific restrictive boxes, or they don't qualify for rent relief programs because they don't have a lease.
That is wonderful. What a like powerful outline. And I think ending that first section with this realization that you're homeless is of course such a like horrifying discovery for the reader to have alongside the real one that you had. I'm really excited to read that. I think Miracle was next.
Yes. Yeah, so some things that came out of the brainstorming for me has been really focusing on one portion of the story. And for me, that's like, how did I get to this large number? $80,000. And I realized that it was a system, a whole system and a process that was complicit by the school. For me, I was forced to include housing and a meal plan. As a freshman, I didn't qualify for any financial aid because my grandmother raised me and she was my legal guardian. So I'm already born into this situation where my mom has a substance abuse issue. I'm being provided for by my grandmother, and still I'm not able to qualify for the assistance that I need, but I'm being forced to include all of these services that weren't working because of where I was at financially. I had to work a part-time job. So imagine being forced to include a housing plan, a meal plan, all of these additional services when I can't even utilize them. So it was like all of these added values that were not, which shows me that the schools are misrepresenting themselves. They're presenting a value that mathematically isn't there. I mean, my first 2 semesters, I probably could have saved $12,000, but instead I've taken that on in debt. So when I've been hearing about people express feeling like a failure, it just, throughout my entire experience, I can only think back that I felt like a fighter. Never that. And for some reason within me, my innate feeling felt like this isn't right from the very beginning. And one semester I even went to financial aid and asked for a supervisor, was like, this doesn't make any sense. Like, there's got to be a better way. And luckily I was able to advocate a little bit for myself by getting housing off campus. But no reasonable person with the right information would just be taking on these added value added services. So it's expressing the emotion for me, feeling like a fighter, not a failure, and also focusing on the misrepresentation of the school and how it was a systematic pathway into debt when I'm already coming from a messed up situation. It's almost impossible to get out of. There you have it.
Thank you. I love that phrasing of feeling like fire instead of failure. I think that's really powerful. And I think including that list of all the ways you felt like you were tricked and these values were added on so that people can kind of get this breakdown of how this all amassed will be really awesome. Next, I think, was Student of the Month.
Hey, so I wanted to just kind of brainstorm like everyone because I'm hearing everyone's like stories and it's giving me like the courage to even talk about my own things. So I just wanted to talk because I feel like I have a similar story to everyone. And I'm still brainstorming. This is my first time coming to one of these, and I was also late, so sorry. So I guess my thing, the theme that comes up for me is like my struggle like with perfectionism, and I feel like that came on through the myth of like the good immigrant and like wanting to like stop being oppressed and like having just insecurities that I was never really good at school, but then I was deciding after high school that I was going to go into the workforce, and I couldn't afford college anyway. I was going to be a DACA student and I fought for all of that and everything. And but I never liked school. I have dyslexia. But I was just also like, what comes to mind was like this counselor that's like, yeah, your life sucks, you need to get a job, whatever. And me wanting to prove people like wrong, that I could be an academic, that I am smart and all this. And then I went into journalism because I was like, let me give the people what I didn't have. So like my wanting to go to school came out of like just wanting to give someone the tools that I didn't have and insight that I didn't have. And just hearing everybody's story, it's like, yeah, that's my story, that I wanted to make my mom proud because she never got the opportunity to go to school and have an education. And like, as a woman of color, I came from like an immigrant background where like women were not given opportunities. And yeah, right now I feel like a failure because yeah, it's just like the bar kept getting moved like every time. And yeah, and actually like I ended up I found out that I could kind of because I have like mental health problems and all this, and I could have technically had a medically canceled my debt, but I didn't because yeah, like I'm also like a renter. I also have that struggle and like our debts together. And like I'm so much about this movement, and I'm really glad to have, this opportunity in this space. And yeah, like I'm really excited to like, you know, brainstorm and like actually write something, but I just wanted to share because I just like heard everybody else sharing, and I just wanted to share my thing too. So thank you for listening.
Oh, thank you so much. I'm so excited to read what you write. And I'm hearing so much the way that your story intersects with all these other things like housing and immigration and ability. And there's so much in there. I think it's going to be a really moving essay. And then the last person I think who had their hand up was for this section was John.
Thanks. So I had already kind of written something, but after kind of hearing this, I thought if it's okay, I'll just read the first paragraph, if that's all right. And it's weird because it's actually similar to the one that you read about 2008, because that's kind of where my problem started. So I'll just read it. And so in 2008, as my wife was giving birth to our second child, the economy was in the midst of a mortgage crisis. My architectural design practice was folding due to a lack of projects. Our accountant and friend of 20 years had absconded with our life savings, along with those of 100 other people. Finally, we learned that my father, during this period, had taken out over $200,000 of credit card debt in my wife's and my name. Well, Wells Fargo was foreclosing on our house in Los Angeles. Credit card companies were calling us 24/7. And at the same time, Sally Mae was starting to ask how we wanted to proceed with our student loan payments, which we had been making on time every month. We had officially arrived in hell. To this day, I still have not made a single payment to them. I am now officially out of options and feel completely beaten up by the system. The money I borrowed to go to grad school was given to my father. He encouraged me to give it to him, and he and the accountant would, quote unquote, invest it. In essence, he used that money to fund his own lifestyle. Therefore, I feel that that loan is no longer mine.
Oh, thank you so much for sharing that really harrowing first paragraph. And I think that it's set in motion so clearly with the stakes with the birth of your child, and then all these compounding new reveals of all the ways that you're struggling. That's really wonderful. Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing, everyone. Those were all so moving. I really can't wait to read and hear more of your work. Let's switch to our last guiding question. So the last question is, what argument or big idea do you want the reader left with? So I know some of you have probably begun your brainstorming process thinking about that. I find that I sort of stagger my way through the writing process so that the thing that I really want readers left with at the end. And so I save this question for last. Let's flip the slides. So if you're writing a short piece like an op-ed, you probably really only have space to develop one kind of main thesis. And then when we get into the writing of the essay, and we'll talk more about this next week, you'll want to think about how to connect your story to a national conversation, since op-eds are usually timely, but I think for now, just deciding what it is you really want to say first, and then we can usually find some kind of hook to connect to the national conversation. And I think a really great example shared earlier was about this potential for the Trump officials are talking about buying up this or selling off this federal loan portfolio to the private market. And so that's an example of the kind of like hook you might make eventually to national conversation. But for now, I think just thinking about what's the main thing I want to tell readers and coming up with that. If you're writing a longer piece, you may make many arguments throughout the essay that build upon one another. Some of them might be explicit and some might be implicit. You'll likely make an argument about the debt, how it's impacted you, or what you want it to be done to the debt. Like you might want it canceled, for example, probably want that to happen. But you might also find that you want to make another argument, an argument about yourself, what you learned about yourself in the process, or how your experiences with debt have shaped your relationship to the world or to other people or to family. Or your community. And so that might be something that you develop sort of implicitly or explicitly throughout the essay as well. Okay, you can flip the slides. So if we look at this longer essay, there's sort of two explicit theses the author says in the essay, and then there's an implied one too. So one of the explicit ones is the author talks about how his student debt was bound up in the wider economic sweeps that impacted him and his family. They tried to pay collectively and they also suffered collectively. Another thesis that he writes toward is, though bad luck played a hand, the debt was the result of a predatory system rather than an individual's, such as his or his family's, poor decisions. Implied is that he had the debt for so long that he grew up with it. So eventually throughout the essay, we learn about his marriage, his consolidation, and then the essay ends with his attending this event hosted by his new lender, which is SoFi, and they have this members party at a Mexican restaurant, and they buy food for all their members who are also debtors. And it's sort of this strange dystopian ending where we sort of ended up somewhere different than we began, but yet everything is still the same because the author still has all this debt by the end of the essay. And so the end note, the essay ends on this sort of grim note of universality. Times have changed, but not really. Okay, you can switch the slides. And then the student loan serenity prayer has kind of one big explicit thesis. The author once blamed himself for his unpayable debt burden. Like many of you have said, he felt like a failure. His debt made him feel really bad, but his views have changed since he first felt that way. He understands now that he was trying to do the right thing for himself and his family, and he doesn't deserve to be stuck in this debt trap. And so he says to himself that he needs to be kind to himself rather than the way that he has been to himself. And so the whole essay is writing toward those two big theses that he says explicitly. This essay ends with a bit of humor as he considers the emotional experience of blocking a call from a debt collector. So a collector calls him at the end and he hangs up and feels sort of like happy and proud and has this sort of comic moment of silencing that call. So we can switch the slides. So we only have, 9 minutes left. So what I was going to have you do here is kind of generate these arguments for yourself, what you think you want to say. And I think instead of taking silent time and coming back together, maybe we'll just kind of end together and hearing from a few people. But before we talk about some of these arguments, actually, Nick, if you could just flip ahead to one slide and then we'll come back to this one in a second. So our next session is going to be Wednesday, October 22nd. So next week, your homework, I'll put in quotes, is to draft some of your essay. So whether that's a paragraph or the whole thing, or if you can't get to a paragraph, a really detailed outline, any of that will be great. Next week, we're going to read portions of our essay and share in small groups and get feedback on our thinking and troubleshoot some areas that are feeling challenging for us. And it's going to be a really kind of interactive, dynamic session where we're talking to each other the whole time. And so I'd love to have you all there for that. And even if you can't get to any of the homework, we still want you there. So I really hope that you'll come back next week because it's been so great to hear from you all. Any questions about kind of that the next session or any lingering questions about this session before we start to wrap up tonight. I see a hand, Miranda.
I do have a question. I don't know if it's too much of a rabbit hole to be a good use of the limited last time that we have, but picking up on something that we were talking about a little bit in the chat, and I can't remember who said it, but somebody else was talking about sort of not being sure if something was too in the weeds to include, and you had said something in the beginning about that, and I know that that's something that I struggle with a lot in my writing. So I write a lot about healthcare and social services, and that is a lot of like being on the phone with robotic systems and just like paperwork that makes no sense. And like I'm often grappling with like how much of the just absurdity of this is useful to show, because it's so much like my daily life. And I think that that's really true with debt too. And I'm wondering if you have any good general advice about, I don't know, it's not quite show not tell. I'm trying to think of like what the sort of like cliche writing maxim is for it, but just like how much bureaucratic nonsense is it useful to subject readers to illustrate the absurdity of these systems?
That is a great question, and I really identify with it because as a nonfiction writer, I'm constantly obsessing over all this information that is really fascinating to me, and sometimes I think it can be effectively employed and sometimes not. So two thoughts. One, if you're doing a short form thing, of course, you probably know you don't have room for that. But if you're writing a long form thing, I think it might be in you're deliberately trying to be attuned to the absurdity of the system, I think it might be useful to include some of that in there. And then my general rule of thumb is just share it with someone else and see what they think. I think it can be hard to calibrate on my own, at least, how much of something to include until I have a little bit of an audience, someone else to help me kind of wrestle with it. So I think in terms of what to include for next week, do it and then see from there. And then the other thing, a third thought is just, it depends a little bit on that outlet too, which is something next week we'll talk a little bit about publishing and some options you might have, some places you might submit to, and I'll give you some information on how to write a pitch if you feel like you're ready for that. And I think you'll probably have a sense of the outlet you want to submit to. And if you think it's something they might be interested in, then I think it could be cool to include. Any other questions? Okay, cool. Well, maybe we'll just wrap up 5 minutes early since I'm sure we all have tons of stuff going on. Hopefully you have a copy of the slides. I'm sure we can send that out again afterward. As Nick notes, this is part of a larger Jubilee series, and there's so many other cool workshops occurring. And so I encourage you to check that out. And I really hope to see some of you next week. It was so lovely to hear from you all tonight.
Thank you.
Everyone. And yeah, as Kirstin said, there are some of those links in the chat. Be sure to RSVP for next week. And also, we do have a Jubilee School event happening tomorrow night, Making the Revolution Irresistible, sort of talking about like narrative media landscape of things that folks also might find interesting, especially pertinent to you writing your own story, but also like what's out there in the moment. So yeah, definitely check those out. And yeah, be on the lookout for an email just with some of those links and reminding folks of that. But otherwise, have a great night, y'all.